Welcome to this episode of Founded in Tech, brought to you by Witham and your host today, Dave Garvey. With today's episode, I am joined by Scott Buxton, who is recognized for his experiences at GitHub and Datadog, as well as startup consulting and investing. We'll learn more about his interesting path from Deloitte to the world of tech and venture, to where he is currently involved with startups on both coasts and most recently in the Southwest. I know Scott will share a lot of cool and actionable insights and ideas for people as they plot their paths in tech, venture, and startups. And now a supremely warm welcome to Scott Buxton. Thanks, Scott, for joining us today.
Really appreciate it, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course, definitely a pleasure. It's great to have you on here. As you're someone who I've been able to get to know and watch very closely over the years. Your path definitely offers a lot to current and aspiring finance and accounting professionals, as well as founders and CEOs of startups, especially in enterprise software and SaaS, where you've definitely developed your own expertise. So if it's okay, let's just go back to the beginning, right? So, you grew up in the Bay Area. How many generations is it?
6, believe it or not.
You're a 6th generation San Franciscan.
That's right. Family came right before the gold rush in 1848.
Awesome. I love it when you say that. So anyway, you're in that area, right? You finish school and then you go join Deloitte, right? And this is just to give context for people. This is Deloitte San Jose office. It's really the time in tech where things had started to recover from the dot-com bubble burst, and now it's that next wave of startups. Can you tell us what it was like to be there then?
Yeah, that's right. So I graduated UCLA in 2003, and that was a pretty rough time, I think, to be looking for a job and starting one. You had 9/11, you had the whole Enron fallout, all that stuff, and so started up in San Jose, as you noted, at Deloitte, and I started in the external audit practice. And what was great is that was also bouncing around the entire Bay Area. So I spent a lot of time up in San Francisco because that San Francisco Deloitte office didn't have too many tech professionals, so they usually pulled from the San Jose office. And it was just it was a great place to start a career. I started in the external audit practice. And I think what I found to be most attractive and appealing for staying at Deloitte is it's, a 200,000 person professional services firm. So there was a lot of opportunity to do things other than external audit. So I would say that's what helped keep me there for the almost 10 years. I spent about 50% of my time doing audits and then 50% of this time in others. So it was a really great experience.
Yeah. And so some of those companies that at that time you had, that was really after the IPO market had kind of stalled a little bit after, now we're hit with the Great Recession, right? So the market slows down a little bit and then it had started to come back. You were involved with some of the IPOs at that time and just doing other advisory work for companies that were, either about to become unicorns or eventually did. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those companies that you got involved with?
Yeah, absolutely. So during my entire time there, I was working solely with technology companies, again, all around the Bay Area, bouncing back and forth between San Francisco and traditional Silicon Valley down in San Jose. And so, like you said, it was really when this kind of next wave of software/internet media IPOs were just starting to hit the Bay Area. And I was able to get, for example, Yelp as an audit client in 2006. They were a very small company at the time, so started working with them very early on. They went public in 2012. That was one of the main IPOs I worked on. I also got the chance from a non-audit perspective to work with the consulting group, Agilent Technologies. A very large tech company was divesting 2 companies, Avago and Verigy, so I got to work on that project. That was a little bit over a year. Then I had some more advisory work working on IPOs at Twitter and Zanga. And when I say advisory, I just mean anything that you can do in a non-audit capacity. Both those companies had different external auditors. So while being at Deloitte, was able to work on many different projects with them, whether it was pre-IPO readiness or internal control work or some valuation work. So it was really great. Again, I feel like that's what kept me at Deloitte for the almost decade that I was there, as I got to see this, variety of tech companies, either very early stage like Yelp or, at a later stage and kind of already public. I also had a laser manufacturer company in Santa Clara. So between all those companies that were pre-IPO and working on the IPOs themselves, as well as had more than a handful of venture-backed clients that were very minimal in revenue and obviously had aspirations to continue to scale and get to a more pre-IPO state. So I had a lot of clients like that I worked with.
Definitely. And what's cool is I feel like, even though that was not the first wave, obviously, out in the Bay Area of this, in fact, some might say it was the third or the fourth, fast forward to currently, New York is finally in that sort of it's that same pace with companies that are exiting and companies that are raising money. It's taken a while for this sort of this nascent market in New York to actually become that. But before we get to you actually coming over to New York, you decided after that decade at Deloitte that, it was time to go in a different direction where you ended up at GitHub. What was it like to make that transition, and what attracted you to GitHub?
Yeah, so it was probably around year 6 or 7 while at Deloitte that I realized I really was enjoying my time there, but I wanted to go to a venture-backed company that had great investors, great products, was growing very rapidly, and just be part of that journey in-house, with seeing Yelp, Twitter, Zynga, a handful of others, OpenTable, LinkedIn. Again, it was very nice having those as clients, but when you saw them complete an IPO or potentially, had a client that got acquired, you were just handed another client. And so around that year 6 or 7, I realized, all right, I want to join a company, but I'm not going to just join anyone. And so I had gotten the opportunity at GitHub because the Yelp CFO, who I had gotten to know very well, was looking to leave Yelp and explore another opportunity after the Yelp IPO. And he had started interviewing for the GitHub CFO job. And so he had known that I was looking to leave, but again, was going to be very diligent on what company I would leave for. Wasn't just going to leave for the first company that was going to give me an offer. So he gave me a call and said, hey, GitHub's this company. They just raised a $100 million Series A round in July of 2012. I'm exploring their CFO role there. I need a number 2 in finance. I know that you've been wanting to leave Deloitte, but just wanting to leave for the right opportunity, not just any opportunity. Are you interested? So I had basically just started interviewing while he was still interviewing. And so this was now end of 2012 and the beginning of 2013 that I joined. Company was about 100 people, less than 20 million in revenue. And it was a really good experience. And I think, back to like pieces of advice that, I've learned throughout my career and try to share with others. It's a very competitive market out there. And so when you're looking at some of these hot companies like a GitHub where, Andreessen did that $100 million Series A round, which was almost unheard of at the time in 2012. I was able to get that opportunity because of my network, because I had gotten close to the CFO of Yelp, because I had communicated to him kind of what I was looking for in my career. And I just feel like I can't stress that enough, that as you're exploring new opportunities or as you're just, working throughout your career, is the value of that network. Obviously, it's about what you know and what you can do and the experience you have, and what you can bring to the table from a skills and expertise perspective, but it's also a lot about who you know that can help, open up doors for you. And so it worked out very well going over to GitHub and working for somebody I had already worked for over 5 years, just in a client professional services capacity.
Yep. And thanks for getting granular with that. I think that's what some of the important things are to capture. Your approach to, how you've been told about different roles or pursued them all involve your network. I think it's just an important thing that, folks understand in varying degrees. Tell us, before we talk about the transition you made from GitHub to Datadog and really how that came about, tell us a little bit about your time at GitHub before you made that move.
Yeah, so I mentioned the size of GitHub, about 100 people globally, less than 20 million in revenue. Joined same time as at CFO, and there really was not a finance and accounting team. There was an outsourced bookkeeper that was just kind of keeping the lights on, paying invoices, collecting cash from customers. And so when the CFO and I started, really just kind of started building out the team and doing it very methodically. hiring out an accounting department. What was great about my opportunity at GitHub is he let me own all of FP&A. And so that was one of the things that was so nice landing at a spot like that, is with the first 10 years of my career being pretty dominant in accounting, now getting the chance to cut my teeth into the more finance and strategy side of the house, while at the same time, overseeing the accounting operations. So really focused on building out the team. The company didn't have any international subsidiaries yet, so we had to get that all set up. It was a very global workforce, where only about 15% of the employees were at San Francisco headquarters. The rest were around the U.S. And then contractors overseas. So had to convert those contractors to employees under international subsidiaries, had to eventually get off that outsourced bookkeeping firm, had to implement systems that the company could scale with. The outsourced bookkeeping firm was working on QuickBooks, so we implemented NetSuite. So really all of the things that you can imagine a company that was growing so quickly and expanding internationally, executing go-to-market initiatives. So really executing on all those things that were needed from a finance, accounting, and operational perspective to help fuel that growth. So it was a really great experience. And in the years I was there, saw the company grow to north of 1,000 employees, approach 200 million in revenue, and that was in less than 3 years. So it was really hockey stick growth. So there was a lot going on. It was very exciting.
Yes, cool. So you put your time in there, and I think it's important to share. So you're out in the Bay Area. This is obviously a place to be for a lot of people. A lot of people in the Bay Area might not consider actually going to the East Coast, right? For at least most tech opportunities, just given the view of how New York was still maturing at the time. But tell us a little bit about how the conversations and the interest and the people involved with why you ended up making that big move to Datadog in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, started GitHub in 2013. And, one of the biggest, I think, feathers in my cap while being there was the Series B round of funding that we started in early 2015 and ended up completing in July of 2015, where we brought on Sequoia at a $2 billion valuation to join Andreessen on the board. Tremendously successful fundraising event, raised $250 million, again, at that $2 billion valuation. And so GitHub was very well, capitalized and on its way to aspiring to be a public company. And during that fundraising process, Index Ventures, another venture capital firm, really wanted to invest in that Series B round. Didn't get the chance to, Sequoia again led that round. But during that process, I got really close with a general partner at Index Ventures and established a very good working relationship, answering his due diligence questions related to the GitHub Series B round, his request for analyses, KPIs, metrics. So really working with him quite a bit, and again, very positive working relationship. And so obviously he was disappointed that he was unable to invest in GitHub, but he had basically told me, hey, I really like working with you. I've got another software company that I sit on the board of out in New York City. They're looking for a head of finance. I know that, you're the number 2 person here at GitHub, reporting directly to the CFO, managing FP&A, accounting, all that stuff. Would you be interested? And so the company was named Datadog. They had been through a Series C round of funding. I actually had not heard of them before. I considered myself to be fairly well versed in tech, following all the news, the headlines of hot companies and fundraisings and all that stuff. But I think to your point earlier, Dave, on New York still kind of not really being on everybody's radar, Datadog was certainly one of those very early pipeline companies headquartered in New York that was up and coming and that a lot of people potentially didn't hear about. So I never wanted to turn down an introduction. Again, I think it's back to what I said. It's a lot about what your network can provide. And this general partner at Index was introducing me to one of his companies. So the connection came in via that network. And so met the Datadog folks. And this was right as the GitHub Series B round was closing. I think, as I was telling people, I was interviewing for a role out in New York City. I got a lot of, hey, you're crazy. GitHub is one of the most successful top tech companies from a private venture-backed perspective out there in the world. Why would you look to leave? But again, never wanting to turn down an introduction, started the interview process and really enjoyed, what I heard. Had a bunch of phone calls because again, was in San Francisco and they were in Manhattan and New York City, and then eventually flew out there in October for, a couple day interview session with the different executives, the two co-founders, and again, really, really liked what I heard. So I was just wrapping up my third year at GitHub and decided to go on board and sign up for Datadog and be the head of finance. And so that was all towards the end of 2015 as Datadog was going through their Series D round of funding that was led by Conic, and I became a full-time employee there first week of January 2016. I had a weekend off to leave GitHub and fly across country and start Datadog that coming Monday. So it's quite the whirlwind.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember someone, a mutual friend of ours telling me about the fact that you were about to take this role and that, as soon as you landed in New York that we should connect. And that was when you and I met, those breakfasts at the Breslin bar where we had the yoga or the yogurt. And, we had we went over to the Nomad Hotel for breakfast, which I always liked a little bit better. Those were fun times, but getting to, for me, someone who has spent the time in Boston and New York tech, to really sit down with someone from the West Coast, on the operations side of things, not an investor, to understand your trajectory was interesting to me. And Datadog, to be honest with you, in New York at that time, there weren't a lot of people cheering about it then. And so it was a lesser known name. Possible folks might have actually misunderstood what type of company it actually was, with all the ad tech and other things happening in New York around that time, which was starting to go through its own sort of, evolution as an industry or a sector. So, we sat down and spoke, and you were there building things from the ground up. And so now that you're there and, there's not this, head of finance above you, it's you. Tell us, what does a master do in a situation like this to actually properly build out finance and accounting?
Yeah, I mean, I think the amazing thing was that Datadog was about the same exact size that GitHub was when I had joined it in 2013. Datadog beginning 2016 was about 100 people, a little less than 20 million in revenue, had a similar type framework as GitHub where there was really no finance or accounting team. There were at two lower level folks, but just mainly at the staff level. And then there was an outsourced bookkeeping firm doing everything. And so it was a very, I would say, familiar situation to be in, given what I had just done the past 3 years at GitHub. But with that very important difference that you had noted, I was the head of finance reporting directly to the CEO co-founders. So anybody needed anything from a finance, accounting, operations perspective, they went to me, whether that was the co-founders of Datadog, the rest of the management team, or even the investors and boards themselves. I was kind of the starting point. I didn't have that CFO blocker. So really, really good experience. And that's what really pulled me out of GitHub, was to take that next step in my career at Datadog. That, along with all of the research I had done on Datadog and looking at the numbers during the interview process, it really did have that feeling like it was going to be that next level hot company. And that's what made me comfortable leaving another hot company in GitHub. But anyway, so, had to really focus on FP&A first and foremost. That was something that, in discussions with the CEO, as we were trying to prioritize how to build a team and what the priorities and more urgent items were versus the kind of lesser important items, we really focused on FP&A. And so that was the first hire that I had made. What was great about Datadog is actually I was given the sales operations group, which only had one person at the time, to build out and have them directly report up through me. So we had determined that that was the second, most important area to build in the company. We had decided that accounting was really working, that the outsourced firm that was doing monthly financial reporting, again, paying the vendors, collecting from the customers, all that stuff was working. And so we had some time to start hiring out accounting, and over time, wean off of that outsourced bookkeeping firm. Other things similar to GitHub, had to establish the French subsidiary, which the co-founders of Datadog were French, and so had to get that going. Established a handful of other subsidiaries globally, back to systems similar to GitHub. That outsourced bookkeeping firm was doing working on QuickBooks, and so implemented NetSuite again for a second time, as well as billing system, expense reporting system, all kind of other systems that were required for a scaling company. And it, again, it was really great being that head of finance, managing what was being reported to the board in the board meetings themselves, presenting on all the slides and everything, being that kind of go-to, call it business partner to the rest of the organization, was just a phenomenal experience. Because again, back at GitHub, I was only in the finance section of the board meetings, which were about a half an hour, and then I left for the rest of the board meeting to continue. At Datadog, I was in the whole thing from start to finish. Really, just looking back on it, couldn't have made a better decision to not only one, move across country, which was a pretty big move, but jump out of a hot company and into an even hotter company. So it was really great in hindsight.
Well, and especially your path. I mean, people have different ways of, advancing. And, you were someone who was always methodical, always took, steps that were meaningful, but definitely incremental, and always had a good, picker for picking the types of companies that you wanted to work with, which has a lot to do with it. And so I've always respected that about you. So now that you're at Datadog, doing all the things you described, building out finance and accounting, you've got sales ops group rolling up to you. You work closely with the founders. You've already got a rapport with a investor and starting to get to know the others. Given your experience with that, what would you say is important when partnering properly with the CEO, partnering with the investors and other folks on the board?
Yeah, in both situations, GitHub as well as Datadog, all the co-founders were technical. So the CEO at each company were both software developers. And so very smart, very bright, but when it came to finance, strategy, accounting, sales operations, other operations, really didn't have much experience. They were smart enough to obviously learn about it and discuss it, but didn't really have any point in their career in which they were responsible for that. So when teaming with the CEO, co-founder of Datadog, a lot of it was from a educational perspective. So really, as you mentioned, Dave, being methodical and calculated about explaining what the next steps were going to be, whether that was from a hiring perspective on the team in general, or systems, or international expansion, things with the financial model, whatever it might be, but explaining to the CEO, co-founder, what it is you're doing and why, and giving him or her the opportunity to ask questions back, to potentially challenge you, because I think CEO co-founders are very good at challenging the executive team that they work with, because they obviously want to be sure as things are progressing that they themselves understand what is happening. And so in order to do that, they ask a lot of questions, and they continue to ask questions until they understand something. So that's important, really important to keep in mind, especially for people that are on their path to being CFO, really trying to put yourself in the CEO co-founder shoes and trying to empathize with them and sympathize with them as they're at this hot growing company that's tripling, quadrupling revenue year over year. What it is they need to understand as to, what you are responsible for. Things like just communicating, and not just to the CEO co-founder, like you mentioned, to the board, over communicating. Nobody likes surprises, and surprises usually come up because people don't communicate enough. So I think really understanding what's the right amount of communication and erring on the side of over communicating versus the opposite, and potentially, having a surprise come about. Because again, it's just really important with obviously leading up finance and having all other departments, every decision they make, every goal they potentially try to execute on, initiative or whatnot, has a dollars and cents impact. And so being the head of finance, you're responsible for reporting on all that, or communicating what might happen if the company or a certain department decides to go down a particular road. So really teaming with that CEO co-founder and being that kind of right-hand person, I would say, advisor, again, call it business partner, however you want to phrase it, is very important, especially being in a new role, especially being a first senior hire in finance. It's very essential.
Definitely. And part of that partnership, is a topic that we've talked a lot about over the years, which is KPIs and metrics. It's always important, especially in enterprise software. There are many well-worn paths. To also just look at some disclosure analytics to see some public company comp data in this area and are discerning about what applies and what doesn't. Can you tell us just a little bit about, what went into what you built so that you could see the right KPIs and be a good partner to leadership and the board?
Yeah, that was one of the first things I worked on at Datadog, was really getting a monthly reporting package together that didn't just have actual results. So it wasn't just a accounting reporting package that showed how the month was from an actual perspective, but digging in much deeper and identifying those important KPIs and metrics to one, define, and two, I think, track over time. And so that was all in this monthly reporting package. And we slightly tweaked it for what was going to the board on more of a quarterly cadence at the board meetings, but also the investor reporting that would come out every quarter. So you had a bunch of different reporting packages depending on who the audience was. And it's just very important, obviously, to focus first on top line. That's obviously the backbone of any business, any company. So whether that's year-over-year ARR growth, bookings from a new customer or upsell perspective, then you look at net dollar retention rate and then gross retention rate to help you analyze churn, customer growth over time, customers that are over a certain revenue or ARR threshold. So all these top line metrics are certainly really important to have in that package. I think also, when you take revenue aside, the other obviously backbone of any company is their cash position and how well are they capitalized? How shored up is their balance sheet from a cash perspective? So reporting on free cash flow, forecasting the cash position and the cash burn rate, because obviously you want to understand how much cash you have on your balance sheet and how long it's going to last for. So that's just as important as revenue. And then other things, headcount metrics, whether that's by department, by geography, by office, with headcount and, salaries and all salary related expenses, usually being anywhere from 50 to 70% of a company's total expenditures. That's a really important one to have, in that reporting package, and to have really strong understanding of the KPIs and metrics, behind everything headcount related.
And as someone like you who's gotten in the weeds on a lot of these different metrics, do you and your unique sort of leadership role at Datadog, you were able to also be a business partner to other CXOs there, like folks that like CRO and CMO. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like as, the head of finance, working in partnership with all these other departments in a firm, especially an enterprise software firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So at both GitHub and Datadog, again, it all depends on what time you join an organization. But based on when I joined both those companies, the CROs and CMOs hadn't been hired yet. So, as a head of finance, in the CFO seat, as those other C-suite positions are being hired, it's really your responsibility to onboard them. And when they join the company, to sit down with them, explain from a metrics, KPIs, analyses perspective, how their department is doing. If it's a CRO, going over all the various reps and the different sales segments, whether that's enterprise all the way down to mid-market and SMB, where they're geographically located, what their quotas are, what's quota attainment, how does attrition look like at the rep level. All these things are very important as a new exec is onboarded, that the CFO can sit down and go over all these things. And then I think as that new C-suite person becomes to start executing on their initiatives and their goals and their KPIs and metrics and whatnot, staying really in touch with them, because like I had mentioned before, just about every single decision that they are making for their respective department, whether it's the chief revenue officer or a chief marketing officer starting to go down a ad campaign route or some other kind of marketing initiative that costs a lot of money, it's exactly that right there. It has a dollars and cents impact. And so it's your job being that business partner and being able to communicate what that impact might be from a strategic perspective, from a financial modeling perspective. If you go down one road versus another, what are the consequences of that, the impact to top line, the impact to cash burn, maybe whatever it might be. And so I think that's truly what the best CFOs can do to differentiate themselves, is being that strategic business partner. Because there's many CFOs out there that can handle the table stakes stuff, and that's the monthly financial reporting. That's ensuring that employees are paid on time, that expense reports are reimbursed, that you're doing compliance abroad with your subsidiaries, or locally with sales tax in the U.S. or whatever it might be. I consider that to all be table stakes and stuff that a finance professional should be able to do anyway. But it's the ones that can team up with the other leaders that really differentiate themselves.
Thanks. Yeah, this is going great. I love all of this that you're saying. So let's switch over to the big event, or at least one of the big events for Datadog, which was, the IPO. Not everybody, gets to participate in an IPO, or at least that was the case when this was, a year and a half ago or so. And even fewer people are actually central to driving it and driving a successful one. That being your experience, what can you tell us about, especially all the IPO experience you had prior to this? What does that look like when you're putting that all into, when you're implementing that and executing and making sure that, Datadog has the best possible debut?
Yeah, I think my one piece of advice there is, while you're private, it's never too early to start thinking about what the team would need to look like if the IPO path were to be gone down. Obviously, you're not going to bulk up the team, in a private setting as if you were public. You want to ensure that the IPO trajectory is there. And so that's understanding at the board level, the co-founder level, that this is a path you're going down. But it's really never too early to start thinking about that, because say it's not the IPO path that you go down, you obviously have investors in this company that have given their money expecting a return on that. So if it's not the IPO road that the company is going down, it's going to be for some other liquidity event, based on that, the investors wanting that ROI. That's why they invested in the company. So I think when looking at it that way, really understanding that it's never too early to have everything in order. And I think first and foremost, from a predictability standpoint, that's where most companies in the pre-IPO stage, I think, have a very hard time. And when they go public, if they don't really have an understanding and can nail down the predictability of the business, that's where they're really going to have, a first earnings release, or one of the first, within the first 5 or 10, they're going to miss their guidance that they presented out to Wall Street, and then their stock, price is going to crash. I think that happens to a pretty obscene percentage of newly public companies that right out of the gate, within those first few earnings releases, miss their previously communicated guidance. So I think really nailing down the predictability, so that's building out the FP&A team, back to the KPIs and metrics, really understanding what those important ones are, back to the blocking and tackling. Financial reporting needs to be consistent. It needs to be done on a regular basis from accounting. It needs to obviously be accurate month in and month out. Quarterly closes are very important. I think, also from an accounting perspective, the internal controls that are going to be required of a public company, all important things to do in that pre-IPO stage, because based on the timeline, you could get going at 200 miles an hour. And if you're not thinking about all these things and you're not having at least the initial building blocks in place, you're going to be in a pretty bad spot. And then I think as you get closer to IPO, and when I say that, anywhere from 3 to 9 months away, then you start doing that fine tuning and those tweaks to the rest of the finance team. You hire an in-house tax person because you're going to need a tax team being a public company. You maybe build out a procurement department because that's an important thing from an internal controls perspective of, thresholds for approvals and requisitions and how expenditures are being done. You start hiring out internal audit, like all these different departments that, back to being private, you would be crazy to have in place you start doing that anywhere from that 3 to 6 to 9, even 12 months prior to IPO, when it is more and more apparent that you are going to become a public company.
So that was a big event for New York, that Datadog IPO, right? Maybe just tell us what was most memorable about it for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a, enterprise B2B software perspective, that was really kind of just coming about in New York City. MongoDB had really paved the way for Datadog going public right before Datadog did. And actually the MongoDB CEO sits on Datadog's board. But, really outside of that, from a tech perspective in New York City, there was Etsy, there's a lot of healthcare tech, there's a lot of fintech, but from an enterprise B2B software perspective, Datadog really helped put that on the map for New York City. And, we priced the IPO at $9 billion, which was, an incredible multiple from where the company was at from a top line perspective. So that was incredibly memorable looking at what we were able to price it at. And I think just, the whole experience and having built things up for years at the company and seeing that all come to fruition. It wasn't just 6 months prior, you decide to go public and then you start building it all again. It really was a project that was worked on for years. Went public September 2019 and I started at the company in January 2016. So I think also very memorable that, yes, incredible event, something to, celebrate, but by no means is it the finish line for the company. If anything, it's really the starting line. Now you're public, now you've taken on money from Wall Street investors, and you need to start behaving and also performing like a public company. Now there's millions upon millions of eyeballs on your company where, prior to that being private, you would have quarterly board meetings, and, the amount of eyeballs you had on the metrics and the numbers, were less than 20. So all of that was certainly very memorable. From a personal perspective, my wife and I had our daughter Monday, September 16th, and Datadog went public Thursday, September 19th. So it was quite the 72 hours from both a personal and professional perspective. So of course that part was very memorable as well.
Thanks. I was hoping you were going to say that, and I love that you did. I think that, listen, I know we only scratched the surface on all the depth you have with working with pre-IPO companies, and I know I'll certainly continue to send folks your way as they are trying to learn through that process. But let's switch over to present day for you. You're no longer in New York. You made a move down to the Southwest. Tell us what it's like now as someone who is, working with a wide variety of startups, on both coasts and now in the Southwest in Texas, either as a consultant or an advisor, and even in some cases, as an investor. There's companies that seek you out. What do they tend to be looking for? And then also, what are you looking for?
Yeah, left Datadog September of last year and now down here in Austin, Texas. Over the years have had the chance to do about 15 personal investments, writing direct checks into these companies at the seed, angel, sometimes Series A stage. And, about half of these investments have advisor relationships that come with them, where they grant me a little bit of equity that vests over time. And I just work with them on a defined set of projects or more ad hoc stuff. And they just reach out to me as they need help. And so that's been really great, working with different co-founders, sometimes with the finance professionals at the respective companies and helping them really prioritize what they're doing at that particular company. So it's been really great. I think certainly able to add value with what I've seen at both GitHub and Datadog. And then, as it relates to what's next, I would love to take another CFO role somewhere. I think, there is a lot to say of being in-house somewhere, kind of what drew me out of Deloitte to be in-house at GitHub. Having these personal investments and these advisor relationships, it's great. And again, I am adding a lot of value, but from a consistency standpoint, from a really getting close with the team and working, with them, becoming, very, trusted, respected coworker. It's very different when you're in-house somewhere versus, kind of one of these fractional type situations. I'm just kind of patiently taking my time to see what's out there while I continue to look at other companies to invest in or have conversations with other companies potentially about, advisor roles, and it's been going well so far. I've been really enjoying it, but still at the same time talking to other companies about that kind of full-time CFO roles to see if I have another one of these in me.
Excellent, Scott. Yeah. So, with some of that, you've described how, what it looks like to be involved with all these different companies and in what capacity. Looking forward, are there companies, is there a certain strike zone for you? Like, is it a certain stage of company, or is there a certain requirement that they have? Whether it's an advisor, investor, or even that, that right CFO type position. What do some of those companies probably look like that are most compelling to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's most important there is the fit that you have with the team, right? Whether that's the co-founder team, the investors at the particular company, the rest of the management team, if they have a finance team, what your fit might be with them. Because, that's the advice I have is you really got to evaluate as you are deciding to team with anybody, whether it's investing, advising, or in a full-time role, if you're the right fit, because you're not going to be the right fit everywhere. There's going to be some oil and water situations. And so the sooner you can recognize that, whether in the interview process or whether you've been working with them for a little bit, the better off both sides are going to be. So I think that's really important. I think obviously having the expertise to be able to help the company out, enterprise B2B software being the space I know very well. So if I were to be looking at, say, like a manufacturing company that has, supply chain issues and is B2C and whatnot, yes, I have experience with that with Deloitte, but that was many years ago. And so in, say, a CFO capacity, that would look pretty different. It could be a pretty different kind of challenge than if I were to, be talking to an enterprise B2B software company. So I think those things are, really, really important to evaluate because, again, back to what I was saying previously, as the CFO, as the consultant, advisor, investor, from a finance perspective, you really are that business partner, and you really are that strategic voice and communicating, again, the dollars and cents impacts on what the company is deciding to do or not do. So having that right fit is obviously very, very important.
That's great, and that's actually perfect, Scott, and a great way to end this episode. It was awesome as always. I see a future episode maybe where we learn more, where we catch up and see what other successes you've had with some of these companies that you're advising and investing in. But just want to thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to keeping in touch, and just appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, would love that, future episode, Dave. And, just let me know on that. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat with you today. And thank you to Witham as well. I really appreciate it. And it's just always great to chat about these things. I very much enjoyed it. So thank you.
Cool. Same here. And definitely want to say thanks again to all our guests and our audience. We are committed to creating content that brings value to all of you. So please feel free to reach out to me directly with ideas for future episodes, or if you are interested in being a guest on this Founded in Tech podcast. And in the meantime, please enjoy and be well.
Thank you for tuning in. If you liked it and want to hear more, you can follow us and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Founded in Tech.